All right, so get ready to dive into a topic that's been all over the headlines lately, and it's definitely sparked some heated debate. We're talking about Italy's recent law and this whole thing about criminalizing surrogacy abroad. We've got a couple articles from VeaSverge.com, and we're going to try to break down why this law is causing such a stir, not just in Italy, but kind of everywhere.
Yeah, the big one.
So before we really get into the nitty-gritty of this new law, I think it's important to set the stage a little bit. Italy already had some pretty strict rules about surrogacy, right?
Absolutely. I mean, surrogacy itself has been banned in Italy since way back in 2004. This new law, though, this one takes things to a whole other level.
Okay, so it's not just about banning it on Italian soil anymore. This goes further. So what's the big change here? What does it actually mean for, let's say, an Italian couple who, they want to have a child through surrogacy? What does this mean for them?
It basically means they're stuck, you know? Even if they go to a country where surrogacy is totally legal and above board, they could still face legal trouble once they come back to Italy.
Wow. So even if it's legal where it happens, they could get in trouble back home. That's pretty intense.
It is. We're talking potential jail time here, up to 2 years, and on top of that, fines that could reach 1 million euros. That's not messing around. It's a huge statement about how serious Italy is about this.
2 years and €1 million fine. Yeah, you're right. That's serious business. No wonder this has gotten such a huge reaction, especially from the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, and that's where it gets even more complicated, right? Because in Italy, same-sex marriage isn't recognized.
Yeah.
So for many LGBTQ plus couples, surrogacy is like one of the only ways they can have a biological child.
So for some couples, this law, it's not just about some legal procedure. It's about their chance of having a family.
100%. I mean, the article I was reading, it mentions protests outside the Italian Senate, people holding signs saying things like, parents, not criminals. I mean, that's powerful. You really get a sense of how deeply people feel about this.
Absolutely. It makes you think about those families who might have been pinning their hopes on this, on surrogacy being the way for them to have a child.
Yeah, and it's especially tough when you consider that Italy's birth rate is way down. I've even seen some experts saying that, instead of all these restrictions, maybe they should be looking for ways to help people who want to start families regardless of, their situation.
It's almost like this law is stuck between two totally different ideas about family, right? You've got this one side, and then you've got this very real problem with the birth rate.
Exactly. And speaking of complicated, there's this whole other thing with the double criminality clause, just to add another layer to all of this.
Okay, double criminality.
Mm.
It sounds pretty intense
Hmm.
and kind of confusing, to be honest. Can you break that down for us? What does that even mean?
Sure. In the simplest terms, it basically means that if something is a crime in Italy, Italian citizens can be prosecuted for it, even if they did it in another country where it's totally legal.
Hold on. So, even if surrogacy is legal in, let's say, I don't know, another country, and they go there for it, they can still face charges in Italy
Yeah,
just because it's considered a crime there.
exactly.
Wow. That just seems like a legal gray area. It could have huge consequences for people.
It really does. And it gets even more complicated when we start comparing Italy to other European countries.
So how does Italy's stance on all this actually compare to, its neighbors in Europe? Are there other countries that have similar laws about surrogacy?
Yeah, you've got countries like France and Germany. They've also got bans on surrogacy. But the thing with Italy, what's really different is that they're criminalizing it, even if it's done legally somewhere else. It's that whole, reaching across borders thing that's really got people talking.
It definitely seems like Italy's taking a much stricter approach here.
Yeah.
So is there any talk about, challenging this law?
Oh, for sure. The articles mention that some opposition parties are already gearing up to take it to court. Italy's constitutional court, that is. They're saying it violates basic rights.
Okay, so legal challenges within Italy, and I know you mentioned the EU before. What about their guidelines on this stuff? Could this law clash with those at all?
It's definitely possible. I mean, the EU's been pushing for more consistency in family law across all the member states, and part of that is recognizing that families are diverse, right? But this law in Italy, with all these limits on surrogacy, it seems like it's going against that whole push for being more inclusive.
Right. So you've got potential legal battles brewing, both within Italy and then maybe even at the European level. Wow. What about what about everyday people? How are people in Italy reacting to this new law?
It's a real mixed bag, honestly. We talked about this protests earlier, and then, of course, you've got LGBTQ plus groups. They're really fired up about this. They're organizing, filing lawsuits, pushing back hard. There's this feeling, especially among younger people, that this law is just out of touch with modern Italy, you know?
It's like this law has become this like focal point, bringing all of these deeper issues to the surface, like how we view family and how those views are changing.
Totally. And this isn't just happening in Italy, you know? This whole debate about surrogacy, who has the right to have a family, how you go about it, that's happening everywhere.
It really makes you think about the bigger picture for sure. But before we go too far down that road, let's circle back to the LGBTQ plus community in Italy for a second. We talked about how this law really restricts their options for having a family, but are there other implications here beyond just the legal hurdles?
Yeah, that's an important point. It goes deeper than just the legal stuff, you know? It's about the message it sends when a government basically criminalizes one of the few ways that LGBTQ plus people can have a child, and it can feel like they're being told they don't have the same right to a family.
So it's about feeling accepted, validated, like their families are just as legitimate, right?
Exactly, and that's what's really concerning. This law could make LGBTQ plus people in Italy feel like they're less than, like they're being judged for wanting a family. And that can have serious consequences for their mental health, their sense of belonging, their whole well-being.
You used an interesting phrase earlier, a chilling effect. Can you explain what that means, like in this context?
Sure. It basically means that even if the law doesn't specifically target families who used surrogacy before it was passed, there's this fear, this uncertainty that might make them afraid to stand up for their rights. You know, they might be less likely to fight back, even if they have a strong case.
So even if it's not directly aimed at them, it still casts a shadow. What does that mean, like practically speaking? What about things like birth certificates, for example?
It throws everything up in the air, legally speaking. Let's say an Italian same-sex couple had a baby through surrogacy a few years ago, before this law. Will Italy recognize both parents on the birth certificate? It's unclear. And if they don't, what happens then? What about inheritance? Or even just being able to make medical decisions for your kid?
It's a minefield of questions.
And that's exactly what has a lot of legal experts worried. This law creates so much uncertainty, so much potential for things to go wrong, and that can have a huge impact on the everyday lives of these families.
It's like this law is having all these ripple effects, unintended consequences that could really make life harder for these families.
And that's why a lot of legal experts are saying this actually goes way beyond just surrogacy. You know, it's about fundamental rights, about everyone being equal under the law, and about making sure everyone feels welcome and included.
It really feels like Italy's at a crossroads here. You've got these traditional ideas about family, but then society's changing. Families are being formed in all these different ways now.
Yeah, it's a tension we're seeing everywhere, not just in Italy. And it raises a big question. As our ideas about family keep evolving, how do we make sure our laws evolve with them? How do we make sure everyone feels seen and respected no matter what their family looks like?
It's a huge question with huge implications. And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, in Italy specifically. But I'm curious, for our listeners who maybe aren't in Italy, why does all this matter to them? What's the takeaway here?
That's a really good question. This particular law, yeah, it's happening in Italy, but it's part of a much bigger global conversation, right? Reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus rights, how we define family in the 21st century, these are all connected. What happens in Italy, it could have ripple effects everywhere.
So it's not just about Italy, it's about the example this sets, the message it sends to other countries who are dealing with the same kinds of questions.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to talk about these issues, and to speak up for policies that support all kinds of families, all kinds of people.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking about those families in Italy who are directly affected by this law. It's a lot to handle.
It really is. And if anyone listening is feeling overwhelmed or discouraged, just remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about these issues, the more we can make a difference.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? The legal stuff, the societal tensions, the very personal stories at the heart of it all. Hopefully, we've given everyone listening a better understanding of just how complex this issue really is.
And if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's that the conversation isn't over. We need to keep talking, keep listening, and keep pushing for a world where everyone feels safe, accepted, and free to build the family they want.
Because at the end of the day, it's about real people, real families, and making sure everyone has the chance to build a life full of love and acceptance.